Serious stuff.
Take this.
What?
Have this.
Why? No, I got leave it in the kitchen, please.
No, you can.
Okay, it's by my hand. I need my space. Put it over there. Okay.
You can have some if you finish.
Bye, man. Hey, man.
Hello, hello.
You are somewhere different again today. You disappeared and now you are back.
I'm trying to put the sound on here, but I don't think it works. Well, I guess you hear me all right.
I hear you all right.
Yes,
So,
yesterday was in Pisa and today is in Torino, still in Italy.
why the two different places?
To check different places because some of the family comes from Torino and we've never been. So just an excuse to move, basically.
That's very cool.
It's like 3 hours ride by train, 3 hours and a half, something like this, if there is no problem. But it's nice.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Monday went well.
I think so.
Yeah, Dini seemed happy, which is, of course, very important.
Indeed.
Yeah, and you know,
I didn't have much to. I didn't have much to moderate because she was presenting and eager to handle questions. So I obviously did not insist on my formal role there.
yeah, I felt that was a bit tricky as well. And at this point, for Dini, being in her shoes must be so tough. So anytime we can help her feel in control, as she is, I think
Yeah.
is good. So that's exactly what you did. So yeah. Are you there with the family?
Yes.
Can I
Yes.
say
Yes.
hi?
Viens ici, Juju. En plus, t'as.
And that's how we're planning to take over the world. Oops. Right.
Yes. Oh no, the record button.
Yes. Okay, so on Monday, I discussed this frame thing that you and I talked about when I was in Shanghai with Dini.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought I was really, really worried because she's all about free space, but she completely agreed with the approach
Nice.
because she agrees that AR is coming. And even though that's not that exciting for us, it's an environment our users will be in part of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So she agreed with the wall thing. So I look forward to talking to that with if Peter and Mark come in today. I had another realization on the way home just now. It was a bit rushed, stressy day. So I'm redoing, you can see my screen, right?
No, I see your camera and I
Oh,
see a little
sorry.
bit of a tint of your skin. Yeah,
Boom, right.
showing.
So this is something I'm just gonna yeah. So at the bottom of the screen in Author, I have writing, map, and outline, right? Useful things. Now in Reader, see here at the bottom, there's also a toolbar now. Because I'm all about, as I said a million times, about new people not getting lost by things being hidden up here and stuff. And so I was wondering, Ask AI is going to be in the lower left-hand corner, view, blah, blah, blah. And then on the train, the middle bit, I should have focus, view, find, references, outline. And that's when I realized that the cards and those tabs are probably roughly the same, right? So in Author, well, all word processing, there is a view for an outline. There is a view for the references, things like that. So I just found it interesting because another thing, while I was just closing my eyes and thinking today, is a definition of freedom is probably something to do with the ability to choose between options, right? Of course, it's
Yes.
much more.
Yeah.
That means that it will be very important that a user can choose to author in my own private software Author, plus our WebXR, plus other places that needs to be integrated. So at some point, as we've already experimented with, we should have a JSON where I'm in my private commercially available Author, click a button, it generates a URL. I go in my headset, that URL is for that document, work on it, and then it comes back down. Now, conceptually, I think we have to do this in the way we've discussed, but not now at all. Because I think, the metadata we agree on and the importance on, but I don't think it should derail us in any way. So what I'd like us to do is keep that as a thought and then only work in your XR environment with the assumption that we can do this, because I think this is a good thing to ask for money next year.
Okay, sure.
Now, that doesn't mean no work will be done. I will continue with my JSON export so that I can be writing something here and then put it in the environment you're building so that, I don't enter with nothing. But these kinds of things will have, the 90% rule. Most of it will work immediately. And then there will be little things. And this is why we firmly agree that your notion of prototyping rather than product is what we're doing now. If a little testing works, fine. But I mean, the polish that I'm doing now is absurd in my own software to make it available. Like the icons and settings, they shouldn't be here. They should be here, right? That is not something we can afford to do right now. So that was my long, long speech.
So one example of what I consider sufficient is something that, let's say, Author generates a JSON, and that JSON has some knowledge object with a position and can be in 2D because that's what Author and Reader manipulate at the moment. And it can save it locally. So for example, on disk, there is like a potato dash and the current time and hour and date .json. It will show them like the poster behind me, let's say. So in 2D, and that it's in practice, what it should do in the long term, let's say, is upload that JSON to a server online and maybe have the 3D coordinates so that we can move them around and maybe some other metadata. But if it does this, just save the JSON file locally and the user in like drag and drop, for example, on the current prototype, and they have some kind of thing that very vaguely resemble this. and have some affordances, let's say picking some knowledge object and moving it, in my opinion, arguably in terms of prototype, that's enough, let's say.
I agree. And I have a funny question. The entire code needed to run what you have now. How big is it? Roughly.
So you're not going to like that kind of answer, but it
Depends on
depends.
it depends on libraries and externalities, right?
Yes, because for example, if you include like the part with LaTeX exporting or conversion of bunch of documents, it's actually pretty huge. It's like usually maybe 2 GB. So that's more than most software. But if you do, let's say, the bare minimum, it's maybe 2 MB or something. So less than most software. So it
So
depends.
let me ask you this, just for fun. Imagine if my user would export a JSON locally, and locally, don't forget, can be iCloud, which is internet, web, whatever, accessible. But the document is exported with all of our XR code. So that means that when they enter the headset and they open that thing in iCloud,
I'm not sure if that works. I don't know iCloud enough because I'm not sure if it can be truly public or if you need like some kind of login, because sometimes there is like a very small but still present like a header and footer that say shared without Clyde or something like this, which is not a problem. But if you do WebXR, maybe it is, but it could be feasible. I'm not sure.
okay. No, it was just a thought of web applications and stuff aren't necessarily big.
I don't know. It could be. It's a good idea. But sometimes, for example, for Nextcloud, they don't share documents. I'm not sure they share documents in a kind of pure manner. They usually like share with Nextcloud and download and a couple of additional options, which I think in WebEx, well, it might actually work if there is the viewer button at the bottom somewhere. But I don't think so, to be honest. But to be tried, be tested.
Yeah. Yeah,
Good.
there are many interesting options for this, but the thing I really want us to talk about today is the two things, the ring and the frames.
Thanks. Yeah.
The frames, it's fascinating to me because they're probably the most boring thing we could do. And that's something that stresses me out a little bit. However, I think it's also the most extensible thing we could do because it has a solid, understood foundation. So hopefully we'll get to a point in the future, near future, where the word frames doesn't really mean much anymore because we have matured past it. But it is, as I sent in that PDF, hang on, let me just find it here. So if we scroll down here, we have object hierarchy, this bit. You probably have a better language for this, so I'm happy with whatever you suggest.
Can you please read the bold thing aloud? Because on my screen, it's 5 by 3 centimeters in total for your entire shared screen. So that's a little bit tricky to read.
Can you read it now?
Barely. So space, frame, and elements.
Yes.
So right now, but I don't know if it matters, but that's what I shared also on.
Hang on, I just have to fix my coffee. I'll be listening to you. Just 1 second.
In the framework we're using, technically, I think space it would probably be a scene frames would be a entity, and elements, well, actually, arguably, an entity
Might go
would
back
also
to you.
be the same thing as frames, but maybe they would have like a shape, let's say a geometry.
Right. So space, you said, is actually a scene.
I think so. My understanding of it is that's what it is. Where it's basically the top of the hierarchy. You cannot go higher than a scene.
Okay.
You would have maybe the 2D document, but you don't have anything. It's at the top of the tree. Typically, the scene is represented as a tree, and the top node of that tree is called the scene.
I'm very happy with that language. And frames are kind of documents, containers. I know it's all JSON, right? But the stuff.
It's not actually. It can be, but in the framework that we're using now, and it's arguable. I don't know if it's better or not, but it's DOM based, so it's basically web based. Whereas JSON doesn't have to be web based. It's usually used on the web, but it doesn't have to. But in WebXR, the framework we're using is very much what's the name? DOM inspired or DOM opinionated, and some of the choice behind it that some people think it's brilliant, which I'm part of those people, and some people think it's just overhead and it's not needed. And there are a lot of people who think that. So again, it's just to highlight that some and knowledgeable people. I'm not saying this. How do you say? To make fun of those people. So it's very smart people. Some people think it's just pointless. But the idea behind A-Frame, that's this framework, it's that there are a lot of web developers and there are not a lot of 3D developers, especially on the web. But if you can help people that develop on the web to make 3D, then you'll have a lot more people that can make XR content. And if you help them by bridging the gap, so by building, let's say, a scene, an entity, and a bunch of primitive like a box, a sphere, a cube, rather, is it? I don't know. I always mix the two because they change halfway. Anyway, a text, that's a primitive also in A-Frame. So it's overhead. Let's say it's a little bit costlier to do this, but then you do have things like a entity that is an empty container for a sphere, a torus, or whatever. So I think why I insist a little bit of this, despite it being a technical point, is that if we do adopt that language, then a lot of those decisions are not ours. We can just piggyback on them.
Yeah, that's
I'm not. Yeah, it's we can point to the documentation. There are a lot of people using this framework, so I don't know. It's one of the decisions I've made, I guess, 10 years ago.
So you're saying you want to basically, I think Brandl says the same thing. You want 3D web to be 3D web.
But it's more than just 3D on the web because, for example, Peter sometimes he mentions Babylon.js. Babylon.js is another framework that allows to do 3D on the web. Babylon.js, though, it doesn't make this kind of mix between DOM elements like a div or whatnot. It's a little bit like 3JS. And 3JS is also 3D on the web, but A-Frame is saying 3D on the web should mimic the DOM, should mimic div, should mimic the behavior of those DOM elements. So again, I'm not sure if that's I think it has again drawbacks or advantages and drawbacks, or disadvantages and advantages. But if we rely on it, a lot of those arguments, we're just saying yes, we think it's coherent, we think it's useful, and thus we don't have to argue as much. So I'm not, again, maybe it seems less novel, but it's more than WebXR, because WebXR doesn't have any notion of a document, for example. WebXR says, here is, if that's, let's say, the headset, here is the headset in space, here is the position of the hand, and you can do stuff with it. But a document, WebXR doesn't care for it. Whereas A-Frame says a document has a scene, that scenes has entities, which can include a cube or a 3D model, like a GLTF model that will have bananas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit, that's the difference, let's say.
Okay, well, when it comes to something like this, I would expect not to care because I trust you and I agree with the logic of what you're saying. However, I care greatly because I think you're right on and it suits my world. Right? It's, hang on, I'm just doing a Photoshop thing here in the background and I just screwed everything up. It suits my world because of what we were saying with conceptually the frames in XR and the tabs in author and reader are the same. And that means that the HTML world, the web world, fits really within that. No, the opposite. All of these things fit within the web world, the DOM world. So I want what I do to be copied. I want author to be ripped off for all of these things. And if it's going to be ripped off, it has to be easy. So if my world is HTML logic based, DOM based for export, then it's a lot easier for someone else to do that too.
I think so. If you want also, I could do a session presenting on A-Frame, or we can invite somebody. Actually, I already invited somebody called Vincent Fretin, a French A-Frame developer who did a lot of great stuff, including some of the networked A-Frame kind of prototype we did last year for social WebXR, basically. He's very busy, but I insisted once or twice, and at some point he said yes. So I can remind him of this without being too pushy. But that could also be a discussion / presentation we have during the next few weeks or months. And it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be like, oh yes, we must use A-Frame, or A-Frame is perfect, or DOM-like kind of frameworks is perfect. Or maybe we need to wait for Brendo's model kind of thing to happen, or maybe not, but it is obviously something we can do to have a discussion specifically on those kind of frameworks, or also maybe to compare it with Babylon or Three.js or this kind of things.
I agree. So I think the guys are joining us early today. I didn't, yeah. Okay, this is all very good. Did you have a chance to see the PDF that I sent?
I skimmed through.
It's the stuff we've talked about, shouldn't be anything new.
Okay.
But I'm a little bit excited by this. I'm going to show it to you again and ask you. So, as you know, hang on, I'm going to move the Zoom interface. Can't. Can you see?
We don't see it. No. So we see here. We just see the UI of the operating system and the document. We don't see Zoom overlay.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I hate visual clutter. For me, the eyes should be able to think freely, but I have obviously this bar underneath here. I think it was actually Stephen Fry who made me do that. And on the left, we have AI. On the right, we have settings. And the settings now become much friendlier. See little icons? Right, that's the level of detail. But what I'm really wanting to show you is, and this is what we looked at a few minutes ago, but I changed it. So in the middle, there's the writing view, map view, outline view, right? So what I think I'll do in Reader is view and settings lower right, because we have settings lower left, ask AI and find, and then the middle, focus, references, and outline, because those seem to be the key things. And I think we should ask Mark today as an academic, because he spends as much time honing his ACM papers as I do honing my software. He's quite obsessive, like I am, but and like you are, but in different areas. So for him to have some space to really try to tell us what he needs, because I know references obviously are core, but what else, right? So the thing we have now, if the PDF has been produced by author, it includes the full text as markdown. So when you go into this view, it's there. And this is obviously inspired by what you need in your JSON. But it tries to do a reading view. So I don't know why I'm waffling on here. I'm excited by the notion of stuff we know should be a unit that is useful in different cases, because it's hard to know. You see here, so this is now a PDF. Here's all the text. I can even do things like this. Right, it's really important that the user can decide what it should be like. And of course, things like this. Oh, tint document window is added. Okay, they don't update me. Fuck. Oh, look at that. What is going on? I don't actually know what that.
I don't see the difference.
Mark, I just saw a new thing. Hey, check this out. This is irrelevant to everything in the world, but I got to show you. You can see my screen, right, Mark? So you see there's a white PDF in the background. You click this button. It's warm. I just saw that now because they haven't updated Jira. That is huge. I'm very excited. Very excited. Anyway, back to reality. That was fun. That was really fun. Hang on. We were just talking about you, actually, Mark.
We can't hear more.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we can't hear you. Okay, so I want to tell you why we were talking about you. And you've spent a ton of time on your hypertext paper. And right now, as I've said many times, as you know, I'm going through a phase of polishing author and reader to make it welcoming to people, not just experiment for people like us. And your obsession with crafting an ACM paper, I think, is quite similar with Fabien's crafting of the XR environment and my crafting of the software. So with that loving undertone, I think it's really, really important for you to even more present to us what important academic things are for you. Because one thing we want to talk about today is the notion of frames, which comes a little bit from this, that, and the other. We'll give Peter a few more minutes, see if he's joining us. But that was what I was thinking about walking down Soho today. Mark's crafting of papers.
Well, I must say I got to the deadline the other thing. He said, I'm not putting this in, it's just not good enough. But they gave us another 2 weeks. So I'm back in the trenches again. And I have seen your message about presenting something. about spatial hypertext. But the funny thing is, really, at its heart, it's very simple. It goes back to the fact that somebody making the point that where things are has relevance. Bearing in mind, this is in the context of a time when people were, could only look at screens of text and were worried about what happens if you followed a link. Well, we're not quite have that yet. And although it started out as not having any link lines at all, it doesn't matter. I mean, what was clear is link lines are noise. Unless you want them, they're noise. And the whole thing about spatial hypertext is less is more. So in other words, if you don't need to see a card with text on and you can just see a blue dot, have a blue dot. It's more meaningful. You can do more, you can put more on screen. And so it's, in a sense, it's quite a minimalist approach, but its real heart, which was never really well described in the papers, is that it's really about delaying formalism. So where it's pertinent to doing stuff in XR is an aspect we've talked about is it doesn't apply to so much to writing. If you've decided that I'm going to sit down today and I'm going to write a page of something, it has less relevance. If you're thinking, gosh, I'm looking at maybe 40 references, maybe it's just 40 snippets of text, 40 bits of my narrative, and I don't know in which order they go, then it's extremely relevant because it's a matter of, putting something in a place that makes sense to you, which brings up another really interesting point that I think people gloss over far too quickly is a mind map is really, a mind palace is something you make for one person. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be pretty. It has to have salience to you. So if you walk into my mind palace, I don't understand. It doesn't matter because it's not designed for you. It's designed to give me memory recall and vice versa. And I think people get lost in that when they talk about making rooms and museums, because in a sense, that's it. You're going to a curated experience, which is a whole different thing where you don't want to be lost. And where rather than have ambiguity, which is what you want when you're trying to make sense, you want the reverse. You want as little ambiguity as possible. Yes, you're in the pre-Raphaelites now, and if you turn right, you're going into the Impressionists. You know where you are. So it is more of a sort of museum type experience. So much of the stuff I'm thinking about and doing is very much in the former category. It's about sense making where you don't know, or ideally shouldn't have an idea before you start what the answer is. Because if you know the answer, you don't need to make sense of it.
So, okay, well, let's start today officially, because that's hugely important. Because one thing that Fabian has managed to communicate to me quite clearly recently is organizing yourself is really important, but you should also be able to, in addition to the structure, add knowledge. Right, so that's, for me, kind of easy to forget. But anyway, so I'm going to introduce to you, Mark, the notion of frames. And this came to me over the ocean between Tokyo and Shanghai. I talked to Fabian briefly. You look very perplexed, Mark.
No, I'm just turning the sound up a bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the notion of this is, I have to walk through a few steps to make sure I communicate it clearly. Yeah, I talked to Fabian about it when I was in Shanghai for many hours. So there's that context, and Dini is also fine with this. I want to make sure you're fine with it and what it would mean, because it's still quite loose. It starts with what I'm reading again and again about this guy. Just happened to be on my desk, Mr. Tim Cook, or Tim Apple, who's saying the big future is AR. AR for us isn't that interesting, but it is coming. It's going to be huge. One of the reasons is a lot of people don't want something clamped on their hair. It can be all kinds of weird reasons. People like the AR glasses. So one of the most obvious things that we'll probably see in AR is people put some of their knowledge on physical walls, which is exactly kind of the opposite of what you said, Mark. It's kind of like a memory palace. I'm not saying it's going to be universal, but it is one of the quote unquote cool initial use cases. Like you have your glasses on over there, you have your project for this, you have your project for that. Right? Mm-hmm. So thinking that that's going to be part of our attention competition in, let's say, 2, 3, 5 years, whatever, how can we build what we're building now to relate to that? Not to aspire to that, but relate to it. So the notion then came to, first of all, having fake walls in XR. These walls are named so that when you are in VR, you can put things on your office left wall. And when you then go into an AR environment, they will be on your office left wall, stuff we talked about many times. But having a fake wall is interesting. And that then developed many kind of layers. Let me just look at my own notes here. To the notion of walls as folders, which is partly what it becomes, right? So you put something on that wall is conceptually partly a folder. So the language has moved into calling these things frames. And I'm going to, I have a few images. Fabian insists on images, for which I am grateful. You can see, right? So you could imagine, and first of all, no, actually, I'll just not do all kinds of complications. So here we have a front view. It's just the simplest. It's obviously, I love HyperCard. I love the idea of having a decent place to read a full thing like an abstract. So this is probably the most plain thing we could have come up with over the last year and a half. But anyway, you have that tilted to the side. You will see there's a stack of them, literally inspired HyperCards, right? You can pull a card out, and that is an attribute of this document. For instance, in my personal world, the front may be a writing card, the map might be, and an outline might be a card. So in a sense, in different media, the cards can have relatively similar meanings, right? When it is pulled out, it can remain in a visual frame, or the frame can be invisible. So if you look at this one, here there is a frame that is visible on the left. All these elements here do not have visible frames. So it means that we're going towards what Dini would like, and which we would all like, which is a very, very free form environment. But we have some structure behind it. So these frames are, by boring default, 2D, but they can easily be extruded. So they can easily become cubes when necessary. So part of the idea here is that a lot of text, no matter what, over the next 10 years, I think will be flat. It should only be 3D when useful. Of course, we should experiment and go too far sometimes. So here's all kinds of stuff of what might be in these different frames. And this is what we'd really like to talk to you about today, Mark. Because, you know, one of the frames could have all the images, or the user's presentation as a knowledge map, whatever. And this is really, really important, that the frames as a substrate should be visible or invisible, depending on user need. Logically, each frame, you know, each stack is a document. A scene, this is why I was talking to Fabian just as you entered, is basically the language of everything you can see. The room, the space, whatever, the language seems to be seen, right? So in the scene, you will have stacks of frames, and inside those you will have elements. Right? So we need to decide what this means, and also over time, a lot of this can be flattened into metadata such as visual meta. Now, Fabian and I had one fun, and I think this is almost the final bit, one fun thing when we talked about this initially last week, which is he has a way where you can do a screenshot that is 3D, but it only has what was in the view, so to speak. I developed an iOS app many years ago where it was a knowingly fake 3D scan. So you would take the camera and you would move it like this, and you would make a video. And when you then played it back, now when then open to view it, depending on the tilt of the phone, it would play the video forward or backwards. it gave a really realistic notion of 3D. So one thing we can do, depending on how this flattened version is, included images, which are screenshots, if they're on a device that can be tilted, actually has 3D to it, which is an inspiration because if the user interacts with that, it opens the full scene. The reason we discussed this is partly because, you know, Bob Stein's Voyager company, right? So there's a Japanese arm of that, independent. When I sent out the email last week saying, this is what's happening in May, hi from Tokyo, the guy who is in charge of Voyager Japan said, you're in Tokyo? So we had a meeting the next day. And he wants to publish a compendium of future of text articles in Japanese, which is great. They are primarily an EPUB publisher. So part of the discussion with them is EPUB to XR, XR to EPUB. I just realized I have a logical issue here. I call it a stack of frames. That's the document. Each frame is an element inside. Anyway, that's something to discuss later. Oh yeah, thank you for the screenshot as instance perspective. So one thing, Mark, actually, since you guys are being so kind to me here, a brief thing, as you very well know, Mark, at the bottom of author, I have writing, map, and outline. I have these tabs, right? I have now decided to do tabs in Reader. So there's view and things, and you'll see here in Photoshop, I'm considering, excuse me, having focus, which is the read mode, references and outline here. To me, they seem like logically the same as the, excuse me, as these things. So now I'm going to stop sharing it and ask you. So our dear mentor Les said many years ago, he wants references to be the first level thing, just like the text is. So I'd really like to hear from you, Mark, the ultimate document components. What do you want them to be over? And thank you for that lengthy time.
Okay, I mean, in terms of structured documents, so that's basically, it doesn't matter whether it's formally academic or not, but anything like a monograph, something that's referenced in the loose sense, i.e. where there are things that, and frankly, that can be footnotes. Something where there is something that sits outside the main narrative, because leaving aside sort of conceptual art, you know, books are effectively a linear narrative, maybe chopped up into chapters and things, but sometimes you want things externally. I've been thinking about this a lot, having to go through, because my working set of references at the moment is about, well, it's about 150 at the moment, and it's hard to keep all that in mind, especially when they're all, in fact, using numbered references. And in some of the key papers, I literally have actually now put some annotations on just with my own brief abbreviation of what it's doing the mental bridge between number 42, oh yeah, that's blogs, but it's blogs is such and such paper, just enough so, because when you're looking at it and you're trying to make, with you're moving around to make sense. I think something that you've already done with Reader is in a sense a way ahead, and I think that's rather what the ACM have done with their HTML output, and I suspect others are doing as well, that frankly, whenever you essentially point to a reference, a citation in text, what you see, which may be done in a number of different ways, but essentially what you see is what that is. So whether it says for or it says blogs 2023, what you actually see is enough information for you to have recall, essentially of whether you know what that is or not. Which doesn't necessarily, the subtle point there is it doesn't necessarily need to be the street address of the publisher, because publishers, a lot of publishers don't admit to having an address anymore. They're just online, which is fine. There are issues there because some domains it matters, in others it doesn't. If you're doing ancient text, it probably does matter. If you're doing born digital stuff, it really doesn't. Actually, what you really want is a URL. You want to know, do I know what it is and can I go there? Are probably the most salient things that you want. Leaving aside issues of paywalls. Yes, I see your hand.
Question, visual question. So obviously you've seen this a million times, but there's a simplicity thing that I've done here. So here is my document frames, right?
Yeah.
I have all kinds of keywords here that are AI generated. As you pointed out many times, Mark, usually not useful. Absolutely. I've added here manually the word marked. So that means that I click on marked in the environment and it points to that one. And this other one. These are the two documents I'm working on. That level with your 150, do you think it would be messy to work in a space like this in XR or 2D, or do you think it would be helpful, or should we columns and lists, or what?
If I was working with that volume, the first thing I do is I turn off all the textual labels. So the only time I want to see a textual label is when I'm looking at a thing and saying, what are you? So much more relevant probably is that I'd be organizing them on a temporal axis, which might not be strictly it's a temporal axis probably that I'd set. In other words, it'd probably be hand triaged. You might do a rough sort, but often someone writes about something they did 4 years earlier. So that thing temporally is 4 years in advance of its publication date. So publication date is the
This is really important to understand you, Mark. Number one, are you saying that the title of the document should not be shown until you ask?
Absolutely. No. Right, no, subtle point here. This is the thing I've been saying about in terms of the knowledge objects and the information that's in the space as opposed to outside, is that you need to have it close enough to hand so that when you point to that grey box, it can tell you I'm frames or icon or whatever granular detail you need. The rest of the time, it's actually sucking your attention away because it's very hard not to read text. We're attuned to it. If you show me a screen with lots of text on, I'm looking at the text rather than the structure, which is what I'm actually trying to do. I'm trying to work out, does this group? So often I'll deliberately dial things back so they're just abstracts. Shapes, color, you can choose what you like, and it won't be the other thing is it won't be the same for everyone. I think this is a very important thing, and this is where there's a danger of being too prescriptive about we're going to call it this and it'll have that form, because if anything, the stuff I've been reading in the last couple of months over and over again, the one thing that comes to mind is it ain't one size fits all. And the more you try and describe what things are and should be, the more you crush people's ability to actually do anything meaningful in the space. Yeah.
I read somewhere their workflow, whatever, is a paper they have not read. They want to see it as title and abstract. A paper they have read, they want to see as title and their own annotation. Right. So that's an interesting change, right?
Yes, but the thing that I'm really trying to draw on is, in a sense, that is one person's view, and no worse for it. It absolutely makes sense. That makes sense only if you're the sort of person who regularly takes, as a matter of your own practice, annotations. Because I'm sure that that sort of person, when they talk about an annotation, they're not talking about 4 pages of notes. They're probably talking about a sentence or two. So again, there's a lot of nuance in this, because if you just say, give me the annotation, and an annotation could be anything, you might get the top 4 pixel lines of a photo, because that's what's at the top of the annotation.
Oh, absolutely. And that was exactly where this was leading. So the thing here, which you're saying from the way you're currently working, shouldn't really be anything until you interrogate it. One axis that you tend to work on is at least time, right?
Yes, yeah, but I would say subjective time. I used to think it was time, and I realized the reason it didn't work was I made the mistake of using effectively publication date, which is often grossly unrelated to the actual time that's in the object at hand. It's an annoyance and an inconvenience. But again, if you are doing deliberate work on something, there is nothing to stop you. Essentially, one of your annotations might be, that this book was written in 1977, but actually it's writing about something that was done in 1967.
So
a classic case of compendiums There.
Yes,
I mean,
that's right.
I don't see so much of it now. There's more digital publishing, but quite a few of the books behind me are effectively where people have republished a compendium of papers.
Yes.
So they're public. They're all. So the papers are after the event that happened. The compendium is probably another body of time after it. And if you make the mistake unwittingly of using that time, you don't get the clarity. But yes, a temporal access is not. It can be, but isn't meaningful. Here's the other problem, and this is why I find myself using a tool that basically has multiple different views, essentially, because you don't know till you start working on it which one gives you traction, and often certain parts of the problem work in one essential layout. In one part, you might be wanting to know the interrelation. Now, whether you make that explicit via some kind of link, or whether you're just happy to say, I'm going to put all these things sort of over there and all those over there, and that's good enough for me, for my mind to know that these are now essentially two disjoint things. They're not unrelated at all. They're not unrelated, but they are things that I wish to think of as being in closer relation than the two groups themselves. So that, again, I suppose what I'm describing is just how fragile it is surfacing structure.
Right.
So this is one of the sort of things where I probably tend to recoil with too much saying it's going to be this and we should be do that. Much easier. Sorry, I just stop a second. So I see hands up. Is that it's not because I'm sort of in some way fundamentally against the structure. My approach is to think, what information do I need in the system, in the object, regardless of how it looks to me at any one time, that allows me to do the sort of pivot I want to explore the problem to where it goes.
Two really quick things, and then it's Fabian. I've been talking forever. Here, as you know, if I now choose this, it spaces it out vertically, right? We could, in XR and here, I guess, have a arrange by time, because if these are documents, it'll know it. So that means it does it for you, but only as an action, not as a scaffold or template. So you can then rearrange them, right? So it just helps you. These 10 documents over here, you know, arrange them by date. But also,
Yeah.
Mark, because of the way that you can manually say things, like in here, you should be able to literally write in English refers to 1967. So that means that you can then choose to have your layout be refers to or publication, for instance. These are fun things.
Just quickly before to answer that before Fabian is I would think of it a different way. You rather than say refers to 1967, you just would have a separate bit of metadata that is essentially your subjective date. So when you want to sort on date on a temporal axis, where that object goes is your subjective thing.
Yeah.
But again, that is I say I shouldn't use the word merely, but essentially, as long as you've populated that strand of metadata, then whatever agent is working on your behalf, whatever algorithm is working on your behalf to do that, basically just needs to know which strand of metadata do I take from each object. And I would say that not because I'm trying to sort of be all datary about it, but actually it is that at that level, it's simple. The moment you start clothing it in structure, it's much harder to see. And there's nothing wrong with having some arrangements as a default. But I would argue that to do any meaningful work, that often you arrange something just to force you to say, no, that doesn't work at all. What I actually need to do is something else. And that's not a bad thing. Sorry, Fabian, you've been waiting patiently.
Hang on, I just want to say that's super important, Mark, because putting the structures on like that can be the equivalent of fiddling with fonts. You're moving stuff about, but not for thinking. Yeah. Okay, Fabian, I will now mute for at least 30 seconds.
Wow, 30 seconds. So I will show you a little bit yeah, it's on. Clock is on, sticking. So I'll show you a little bit my background because I think it's nice, but also because there is a point. So the actual background is not so nice. It might be a bit noisy, but up.
Yep.
So
that is not Southampton.
It is not. It is not. It's a little bit sunnier.
We
It's
have
in
25
Torino.
degrees here today, Fabian.
Well, nice. Here too. A little bit more days. No, but what's I think might be interesting here, and goes back a little bit to the earlier point about the, or much earlier point about the memory palace. I think a lot of time, what we seems to have is a kind of form versus function kind of discussion, where like, oh, do I have the outline, which doesn't have a form, but have a function? We don't really care about the shape because it's quote unquote the structure of the data. Or we have it that is displayed in front of a screen, basically in 2D or however, and thus we navigate through that document. And if it's in a memory palace kind of form, it's like, oh, it has to be that form embeds a certain structure, but the way it's done is very specific to you. It's based on your palace, basically your home. And I think that's kind of a problem we all have very often, because once that embedding happens, once we place this data, let's say on our virtual home and on our physical home, in order to remember that structure, it is not just visual. It is not just a form. There is actually some structure. So here I was showing you the beautiful background. I bet that this will help to kind of remember that discussion. It is not just a visual background. It is like, it's going to help me remember, because we had this kind of discussions 2 days ago when I was in Italy and whatnot. So I think when we try to, for example, here in a lot of our discussion based on the web, it's like the DOM and then CSS. DOM is the structure. It doesn't have any layout. It might be interpreted through the engine, let's say the browser, in order to look a certain way. And then we add on top CSS to kind of make it. Once that CSS reach a certain point and we interpret it with our own eyes and mind, then it's not just structure, for example, because it's bold, or it becomes important. And bolding part of a sentence means more than just making it visually stand out. It's like some of that specific part inside the sentence is important. So I think a lot of tension we have is a kind of fake decoupling between structure and shape, or yeah, what is core to the document and interpretable with, let's say, a system, versus what is just visible and not necessarily interpretable. Because if we add CSS and we say bold, is it actually bold, or we put it like a slightly bigger font, and then we lose this understanding that there is a structure behind it. And I bet that when ourselves, for example, we are in an authoring environment and we put something in bold, we don't mean just bold. We mean important, for example. And I think that might be something that's crucial for us here if we work rather on authoring documents in XORs. We don't just mean make it bold, we mean make it important. And make it important maybe means doesn't even make it bold, but pull it a little bit closer, like a bit less depth. But it's not just making less depth. It's, for example, maybe when we pull it closer, make it more important. And I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how to do this. Is it because when we change the position of something in that virtual space, we change the structure, and thus we like learn what the document actually is or how we structure information? But my intuition here is that a lot of our challenges in XOR and outside of XOR is this kind of changing how documents look, just the layout or just the visual aspect of it, but there is more into it. And we don't necessarily know how to label this. Maybe bold is not sufficient, maybe important is not sufficient. How do we do this, and how do we kind of reconcile both aspects? I don't know, but that's my intuition, that a lot of those tensions we have is because we discussed about structure and how to represent them visually as two things separate, and that the back and forth, they don't necessarily like come back as one either just structure or visuals or both.
This is so important. They say, a messy desk is a messy mind, and that's of course rubbish. You know, my father's desk was very much messy, and Doug Engelbart's even worse, right? There is something, you make your own mess, and it's not a mess. Absolutely important. The little added detail to this is, oh, here's Emily. Emily, come say hi real quick.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
He's upstairs. Can you close the door, baby? Thank you. Is that my father preferred to print out faxes back in the day, and they got yellow over time. And he said that was a benefit, not a bug, because then he could easily see, you know, stuff he should have been dealing with. So having these kinds of visual cues for inherent stuff, even analog, is really useful.
Well, it's interesting that same metaphor was built into, I don't know about Story Space, but certainly in Tinderbox. So the icons sort of start out a duck egg blue and mellow over time. Funnily enough, digitally, I don't think it works as well as the paper metaphor you've described. I absolutely know. Whether that's because one's had longer to get used to it or because it actually happens over a longer time. It's sort of, time gets bent out of shape in a digital environment in all sorts of ways. Is another inconvenient thing. That you can go and do things that normally would take a long time to do, and therefore are separated, that now no longer are. So that in that way things collapse. I was just in a sense I said an amen to what Fabian was saying. I think another hello Peter, another possible confusion arises because, without meaning to, I think we constantly conflate our sort of our personal sense making of information in front of us with, in a sense, that's, if it makes sense to me, it makes sense to everybody else, and it sort of, in a sense, it upsets and annoys us if that's not the case. So we keep running away from the fact that no, something that's highly tuned for me personally may not be best set for somebody else. But again, if we're capturing the point of some of the glosses and things we're doing, then actually one thing, funny enough, that digital environments allow, which was much harder before, is that can be tuned. So in other words, if the organization knows how you like to see important things in a run of text, you might want to see it bold, I might want to see it, I don't know, in green. It doesn't matter. So as long as actually we know, going back to what you were saying, if we decouple this, because I think you're absolutely right. Unwittingly, we get lost in styling as a proxy for meaning. And what we forget to do is to capture the important bit, which is a bit in the middle, is, you know, why I'm making that bit bold. Because what making it bold is, in a sense, just styling. You say thing that is this needs to be bold, but we don't capture what the this is. So I on the same sort of axis, I think another place, and it's sort of, and it is a challenge when sort of trying to design the space, is quite apart from something meaningful to me as opposed to another person, is I think also we are slightly deceitful to ourselves about really what we mean by collaboration. So is it that there's a degree of co-editing? So for instance, if I'm in a VR space and somebody else edits the thing that's in front of me and they move it somewhere, do I move across the space? Does it suddenly disappear from in front of me? Collaboration in that sense is actually non-trivial in a way that I think we're dishonest about. So what we talk about is the fun of it. We dial up in a sense the fun and the enjoyment aspect. We don't actually dial up the, does it make sense? You know, what problem are we actually solving? And so a lot of these things end up, I think, being unintentionally being toys rather than meaningful tools. That is not our intent in doing so.
Thank you. I have a brief comment, and then Fabian, and I think after that, I spent literally 2 minutes bringing Peter up to speed on the frames nonsense, and then we spend the rest of the time on the rings. Is that a good use of time, everyone? Okay, cool. Right, so really briefly on what you just said there, Mark. I've been working on the user guide for Author, and I've had to go through the clarity versus completeness again and again and again. And it's interesting when you talk about bolding and stuff. What I've done now is I used literally bold for bolding so people can see where things are. and I use our mark to mark. It is not the same thing. And even though I'm a hugely visual person, fiddling with fonts pisses me off for exactly the reason you said. It is a surface thing. It is a waste of time. It has to have semantic value, right? So that's why here in the outline, you can choose, if I click on settings, to have marked text appear when you go into the outline, right? That is something that the user, because there is a semantic value to why you mark text, should appear or not. And okay, Fabian is away for a second. Okay, I'm going to use these seconds then really briefly, quickly, Peter.
I'm not that far. Huh?
Oh, okay, fine. I was just going to do the frames, but very happy for you to take over, and then we go back on that for literally 2 minutes or less.
So, no, it's I think a lot of us, I think everybody here has been stuck in that situation where basically you have a document and you have, let's say, a guideline where you need to do the styling is not even yours anymore, basically. You have to read the document because you need to send it to a publisher or something like this. And in a way, it's liberating because you have to use, let's say, this font and this level of this size of the font and whatnot. You don't have the freedom anymore to choose. So that's liberating because you're not indeed going to be finicking around for hours on end, what feels endlessly, basically. And at the same time, I think we all feel very much constrained that, for example, the level of detail in terms of, I don't know, how many depth we have in the, for example, the table of content, it's not enough. Or if we, for example, want to put italic inside the name of an image or a figure or something like this. So I think we all get stuck there that if, for example, to go back to the DOM or we use XML, so we define purely the structure of the document. We don't define at all what it looks like. Then it's very liberating because we don't care about those finished stylish details, but there is no freedom to it. If you want, for example, to put a figure on the at 50 pixels on the left and at the top, and you cannot do this, it's super frustrating. And it's frustrating because sometimes it has meaning. It is not just a styling thing. You don't put for the style. Is, for example, maybe you want to illustrate the point that you want to put an image at the top left corner because, I don't know, you're doing, let's say, you're working on a document about Egypt, and then the cartouche has done a specific layout. So it has meaning in it. So I think that's a recurring tension. Either you don't have the layout, you don't have any say at the layout, or you do, but you can do it endlessly. And I think that's kind of the problem also, because if you can manage the layout on a rule-based basis, so that every document, every figure in a document goes to the top left at 50 pixels by 50 pixels, and then the next page you don't, then you don't edit a document, you edit a rule system, which might be powerful, but then you are like, what am I even doing in the first place? Am I writing a document or am I writing a rule system? And I guess LaTeX kind of gets in those trenches too. If you want to edit a document, and I think, again, even for people who like to edit rule systems, let's say developers, at some point you're like, I'm spending more time doing some kind of meta aspect of editing rather than the editing, and even worse, let's say thinking itself. So you're spending more time on things you're not really interested in. So I think that's kind of the kind of tension on at least two different methods. One is like freely styling, and you do whatever you want. You have a 2D page and go at it, put things wherever, like say the kind of like whiteboard free form. Super powerful, but maybe, yeah, it doesn't scale, or people don't understand, or you don't have structure. For example, what Bob is doing, we're a little bit stuck there because we don't have the structure behind it necessarily. We would like to, because then we could put it in WebXR, for example, but it's kind of problematic. Or something that has no such freedom, that is very structured, but then maybe that doesn't have the same level of refinement that we would want to. So I think it's a recurring challenge most of us encounter, and I think it's because again a kind of decoupling between the two, because when they are purely coupled, when structure and style are one, it is so rigid. For most people, it's not sufficient enough to think. So maybe the back and forth on the coupling itself could be interesting, so that you have, let's say, you start with something that is very strict, and every time you do it freely, it may write a rule dedicated to it, but it might not apply to the next pages unless you want to. So maybe that's something, and I mean XR, but also in 2D, like in traditional authoring, for example, maybe even like in video editing, I don't know. But it might be something that is like iterative coupling of structure and form, or structure and style, basically. Maybe that itself is something interesting, not specifically to WebXR.
Big time agree. And one of my realizations in the mapping and author is when you're doing knowledge work, there has to be some hands-on and brains-on, right? And that means intentionally saying what something is. Like Mark was talking about, the number 42 means this in his world. You know, in a sense, it doesn't matter if it's a purple donkey, if it's a sentence or a picture or whatever. If we don't use our brain to connect things, we're not, yes. When it comes to freedom versus structure, that's why I like the notion of you select a group of objects and you say, do this with it, such as lay it out on a timeline, but it's a command that's just done. So now you can adjust it to your liking. So it's not like it's locked into something. But Peter, I think you're going to like what I'm going to present now, because it's very much, hang on, I'm going to not do screen sharing. So here is the idea. I expect, like a lot of people, that AR will be a big deal soon. AR for us is not that exciting, but it will be a big thing, likely, and people will then naturally put knowledge on their walls. So we're talking in Memory Palace in your real world, right? Now, how can we preempt that by what we are doing, and how can we be relevant when people have that capability properly? And I'm not talking about the heavy thing over your head. I'm talking about the glasses, 5 years, whatever. So in a conversation with Fabienne last week, when I was in whatever, there's the notion of maybe we should fake walls in XR, but they are labeled. So that, for instance, one of the walls is office front, office left, whatever it might be. You put your things on there, and when you get in AR mode in the future, and you have assigned these walls in your real life, whatever you put on there will be there, right? So that then becomes, walls become folders, or walls become documents. So thank you. Yeah, this is very much taken from what you've been talking about. So yeah, walls as folders in the form of frames. I'm using the word frame. So whatever thing you put up on the wall is a frame. Now, the way it would look, it could look anything, but as an initial thing, you see it as a HyperCard or something from the front, and then you tilt it a bit to the side and you see cards behind it. So you can then choose to view it as a spatial hypertext connected, linear, whatever you want. When you pull something out, it can show its frame background, the substrate, or not. Here is an example of, you see it on the left, the frame is there, on the rest of it, it isn't. And here's one where it is not. So this is trying to deal with the notion of freedom versus flexibility. Where is something owned in the space and so on. So here's an example of something really clearly framed, really clearly not. And guys, while we were talking, looking at the hierarchy here, so the top level is called scene, as Fabienne pointed out. Then we have these frames, and within the frames, if we look at these things here, maybe we should call them sheets, because if, let's say, one of them is all the images from this document, another one is a knowledge map, another one is an outline, we need some kind of a way to address it. And it is actually, happily for me, I realized today, analogous to the tabs in in Author, right? So it should be analogous to lots of different systems. You have one sheet that is your references. So you can start doing things like that. And Fabian has suggested that we use the web framework for WebXR and everything, because there's a lot more web workers out there than 3D workers. So that means for me to try to conform my commercial software to fit what Fabienne is doing, if it goes wide web standards, DOMs and all of that good stuff, A-frame as Fabienne just typed, it makes it much more open for someone else to copy what I'm doing as a test. So conceptually, that's important. We're not really going to invest any time in that now. We're going to invest time in the interactions. So now that I've done this basic talk, and even though it's a frame, of course, it can be extruded really easily to be a cube, a volume, or whatever. But it's a place to literally hang our thoughts while we're dealing with things, because what Fabian could have shown on Monday, but we had the great presentation by Dini, is this ring interaction. And this is the stuff we really need to get into. For part of the unique aspect is in XR is the interactions. So Peter, if you have any comments on the frame stuff or not, please, and then we go on, and Fabian, maybe we even try it, Fabian.
Well, Mark had a good point about lack of wall space in the real world. And I think the solution to the bookcase problem in an AR environment might be to be able to trigger some sort of an affordance that would slide solid walls up over your bookcases to give you a virtual wall that's just sort of projected in front of the farthest out thing sticking up on your real world wall. So I think that's an easy solution to that issue. The frames idea also could be interesting with persistent documents where you could layer different versions in front of one another. I think dealing with versioning is very important. And what I've been thinking about more and more the last couple of days is how can we represent pure functions in an AR space so that you're getting a copy of whatever you put in on one side out that's changed without it actually changing the original thing that got shoved in the other end. So I don't know if that would be a ring, I don't know, maybe a cone or some other geometric primitive that could be associated with a pure logical function as opposed to a procedure application that's transforming the underlying data.
Cool. Fabian, just if you don't mind, I'm just going to reply really briefly to what's written here. The whole thing about there being pictures and stuff, as Peter says, there can be the virtual thing can be opaque. And I think one of our competitors is a conference room where you can print to put everything on the walls. At least logically, that's a competitor. So you need to be able to not just do one, left conference wall or office wall. You need to be able to do as many as you like, sub-wall. So you literally snap your fingers and suddenly all your walls change.
But if I may, just very quickly, the bit I don't understand is, so we keep going back to very structural things. So walls are very solid, very upright things. Frames are innately a rectangular form of thing. But if you have a frame that doesn't show its frame, what the hell does the frame matter? It's just how you display the object. It seems like we're clothing this with unnecessary baggage that actually makes us harder to do things. If you strip it back to the sort of primitives within it, I think it makes it much easier. There's a danger that we create an interface for something we don't need, and then actually make it harder to use.
What would you say the primitives within it are?
Well, for essentially what we're calling knowledge objects at the moment, there's something in there. What it needs to look like is what it needs to look like. I mean, I sense what we're tripping over is an argument over what the default looks like. Is we don't mean to, but I have a sense that that's what's happening here.
Yes, I absolutely acknowledge and agree with that. It is very much about the default. It's also a little bit about our language, because, hang on one second here. So yeah, all I'm trying to do is give Fabian something really concrete in the beginning, because I do think that most reading will be on a rectangular card for a very long time. for an abstract or an overview or something like that. There is no real value in having a transparent background and having it warped in 3D space, all of that stuff. We need to experiment with that, sure we do. But to have a basic way of, here is this, and these, they're literally stacked together, we change it. As I said to Fabienne earlier, and this is so in agreeing with you, Mark, the word frame in a few years may completely lose meaning. I agree. But if we just have a vocabulary now, we agree with a certain level of hierarchy, we use it for a while, then at least we internally know which bit we're referring to. That's all. And it is in no way meant to be tied to a fake wall. That is just one of the potential useful placements of it. That's all. Peter, and then we'll go over to, I know I didn't really put you at ease there, Mark, but that's at least my perspective for now. We just got to get on with it.
Anyway, I have some thoughts, but because I want to get to the demos and things and hear what Peter has to say.
Okay.
Okay, one issue with using the term frame is that it's fairly heavily overloaded in literature. And a lot of people, my first reaction when I hear frame is I immediately think of knowledge representation and a frame being a collection of slots that have values. So right away I go into that early symbolic AI world use of the term frame. Languages like FramerD from the MIT Media Lab, things like that immediately come to mind. Then from anyone coming from an art background, frame, they're immediately thinking of a literal picture frame. So that's a bit of a problem for us. Really like decomposing things down to the lowest level. We have primitive values. We could have a number or a block of text, a clip of video, a 3D model. I think those would be like the atomic elements that we want to be working with. Then you have bindings, and a binding is associating a name with some value. Then you have functions, and a function has a set of parameters, although you can decompose that if you want to work really low level and just have single parameter functions as being the lowest primitive there, because you can always represent a function taking multiple arguments as a series of applications of functions taking a single argument that build up to the result of having your larger argument list with whatever little interface affordances you want to layer on top of that to make life easier for programmers, like default values, named values, and the like. Then the function body is basically just a list of applications of other functions and primitive values with a couple control structures thrown in, which we call special forms. So you have special forms, you have your primitive values, you have functions, you have bindings, and those are the elements on which you can scaffold up any arbitrary programming language or complex system. So if we can represent those core things in AR, even if they're not normally represented to the user unless they, blow this apart and look inside or go to the scripting level of HyperCard. That was one thing I really loved about HyperCard, was its notion of the different language levels. So you could be operating at the data entry level, you could shift to the painting level where you're just playing with styling. You could go down to a deeper level where you can actually look at the controls and move them around and see the scripts underlying the elements. Okay, that's all I have for now.
No, that's really good and useful, Peter. Just really briefly, because it's really time to kind of get on with this. And I like the idea of frames, but I accept there are issues. If you look at my message here, I'm asking all three of you, the thing, what language should we use? Should we call it HyperCards, cards, or documents, or what do you guys feel is most natural? Just to give it a name, give it some lipstick.
My sense, I suppose my overriding sense is, I look at some of these things, I think, here we go, we've just built a faster horse and cart, not intentionally, but I think the challenge is this, and it's hard, is to just move away from paper metaphor for two reasons. One is it's not what we're doing now, and two is in embracing it, we get familiarity, but it comes at the cost of all sorts of constraints that we no longer have. So we start thinking with one heart, in a sense, with one arm tied behind our back. So it's not an antipathy. I'm surrounded by paper. It's not an antipathy to that as such. But I just you know, I mean, cards goes back to library cards, and we're back in the 19th century already.
No,
And I don't,
no.
and
I
it
don't
mapped
buy
to
that.
small screens of the 80s. We don't have that now. We have so much more flexibility, and I think
Okay.
it behooves
Mark,
us to look for paradigms that
instead of saying
actually
what's bad, what do you
entertain them.
think is good? Do you have a suggestion for something you would like to use? Because I agree they all have limitations.
Well, the thing that what's not clear, and it goes back to my point about the frames, is I'm not clear how these names interact with the knowledge objects. I understand what the knowledge objects are. They are globs of data existing. We can't see them. They exist in the construct.
Let's call them papers or manuscripts. The basic ones are papers or manuscripts. You should be able to tear off a note or an annotation, sure. But the basic unit that Fabian has to code around is what would previously be a Word document and a PDF. Those framings will still be necessary. Published paper, of course, the Word paper isn't ideal, will still be a thing. It has to be frozen in time to be citable and all of that stuff, right? So
no, I mean, as long as the citation points to the relevant place in the time stream, it can be anything. I mean, you do that with something like a wiki page. So we passed that barrier already. I mean, historically, if I want to talk about something printed in the 20s, yes, that's true. The thing is that actually those things like the Word documents you're referring to aren't actually probably what we are working on today. There are things that I may have to refer to, but they're not what I'm working with. What I'm working with, what I'm writing, what I'm doing is not until a very late stage something that in a sense looks like a document. It is a collection of things, mostly textual ideas. But often it might be just be lists. It might be, in a sense, sets of keyword association type things, because they're the really powerful glue that helps derive the linear structure that I need eventually. So I'm not trying to argue deliberately, but I just don't buy the premise that everything starts as a white rectangle.
Okay, that's fine, Mark. But there are still going to be two things in the space. Things which you have made public and things you haven't. Whether it's part of a database in a wiki or whatever it is, these will need to be somehow interactable. We cannot be at the level of just abstraction anymore. We have to, at least internally, at least for now, have a language for what we call it. Do we call it a manuscript? Do we call it a document? Do we call it a frame? Do we call it a blob? I mean, I don't think blob would be useful.
But how does being public or private change whether it's a manuscript or not? I don't follow.
Because at least in the world as it is today, once you publish something in the ACM journal, you shouldn't be able to, as the author, change it, right? But making it public is the act of, here is a statement I'm making now, so someone else can cite it, and I should not be able to change it without that being part of the record too.
So it's a locked record, is what you're describing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and they are socially and culturally very different. Technically, not necessarily so much at all. But, you know, in the environment, we need to have a place to write, and we need to have something we can read and not worry that tomorrow the author has changed what we just read. So we need to have a basic language for what exists in my software, Microsoft Word, and in Fabian's knowledge space, so that we, at least in our group, can have a coherent discussion around the interactions for it, because we'd go in a ton of circles on this.
But no, I understand what you're saying, but to a certain extent, that's because the things that we're saying don't chime with your internalized perceptions. And this goes back to what we said at the outset: is that what makes sense to me doesn't make sense to another person, and vice versa. And this is problematic. But if in attempt at well-intentioned, if I just decide the thing that makes sense to me is the obvious way to label things because it does make sense to me, then actually that isn't necessarily as helpful as I thought it would be, because to most other people it's not actually meaningful, and it's actually
Mark,
confusing.
The four of us must be able to have at least some basic names for this, right? We're spending another half an hour on just this thing. If you have a suggestion for what you think it should be labeled, please do tell. right? And because I really value your perspective, both as a friend and as an academic. So I'm not trying to tell you just, we get on with it, but we can't just go in
But
loop
the
about.
confusion, I think I can strike to the heart of the confusion of this, and I'll stop because of we need to see what Fabian's going to show us. But I think it's the presentation of a name with a sort of already a world constructed around it is confusing. It'd be easier to take the name, say, does the name make sense, and then say, well, this is what I do with it. When it's presented as a fait accompli, then it becomes a binary take it or leave it. And all too often it's a leave it because it doesn't actually make sense to the listener.
I don't actually know what that means. I really don't know what, I mean, look, designing is really, really hard, as you know very well also, because you're building without a pre-existing construct. There is no map, right? So when I first present some of this stuff to Fabian and Dini, I presented it as a user guide, as a walkthrough, because it's a way for me to think it through. When you write a user guide, things cannot be vague. It has to be a button there, a thing there, right? I find it useful, but both Dini and Fabian felt that I was being very prescriptive, as you were saying. So I had to walk that back a bit. But when you present an idea to a group, you can, of course, spend a lot of time and effort in saying, maybe, perhaps, perchance, this could be in a certain thing. Or you could just say, I think it should be thus. Take it or leave it or modify it. The modify is important. But Mark, why don't we drop the language for now? And then
sure.
on Monday or Wednesday next week, if someone has a better language, and I'm married to Emily, I'm not married to any of these concepts. I'm completely happy to change it, provided it's something the group finds coherent for now. And hopefully in a few years, it'll completely change because we'll go past it. So your concern is duly noted. Fabian, anything before you start ringing our bells?
Yes, I'll try to see what's. I don't know if it's my understanding, at least, of frames or whatever we've been discussing now and last week, basically. I was going to show you a physical example, so you need to look at the webcam, but in order to make it visible, I was going to make this a frame. And also to highlight, I think it was, I don't remember, it was Mark or Peter's point that we might be lacking walls, ironically enough, in order to make it useful in AR. So we can indeed make fake walls. Like if we have a virtual plane, we can, for example, exactly like here, you don't see my arm anymore. And thus you could put text on that frame, even though the wall behind, it was busy before, but now you don't see what's behind. So first, that's feasible today. It's not a problem. And I've done it in the past for roller skating in my kitchen. You don't honestly want to know all this kind of detail, but that works today, not a problem. But yes, as I was trying to do this, I thought indeed some of the remarks were interesting, like do we go back basically to 2D? And thus, what's the point? So in my opinion, first, we don't have to. So I give this as an example. But the shape itself, I don't think it's the problem. So I can use this. So it's transparent, so you need to see it there. Tupperware or plastic container for food. And I think the power of a frame or a container is that you have a thing, so let's say a knowledge object, and then you can attach it to the container. So here, my knowledge object is attached to the container. And if I have another container, I can put that, or another frame, I can put, so I should have done the other way around actually. The bigger container will host the smaller container. The knowledge object is stuck on it. And the power of this is instead of moving one knowledge object, of course, we don't care so much, is we put one knowledge object and a second knowledge object on that container. You can see the yellow one and the red one. And now I'm not moving the knowledge objects themselves, I'm moving the container. And if I put another container or frame and inside it, it's the same thing. And I can have another knowledge object here but the point is I'm moving the frame or the container. So the shape itself, it can be flat and it could be colorful, or it can be in 3D or transparent. But in my opinion, the power of a frame, a container, or whatever we name it, is that you bring a hierarchy, so a structure to those knowledge objects. So the container themselves, they are empty. There is literally nothing in there, and those ones are good because they're transparent. They do have a shape, but it could be a different shape. They don't have to be rectangles. They can be cuboids, or they could be spheres, or it doesn't really matter. But the point is, the power and the usefulness of it is that if you move one, you move all the dependency of it or the children of it. And I think that's enough to get us going a long way, regardless of how we name them. Because again, like literally physically, as you see from the video, that works. I pinch this and then I grab everything in there and move it wherever I want to, or can apply a transformation to that container, and then all the knowledge objects attached to it would receive it. So I think that's my interpretation of how such an abstract entity would be useful.
I think that was fantastic. I loved your use of things. Peter, don't look at my Safari. I didn't buy the book at all. No. You just expanded the discussion also very usefully there, Fabien, because me, at least, I was conflating a little bit. I think frames and walls, they're not the same thing. But walls are basically placements of frames that are optional. But then, of course, a really important one is, and this could go on forever, but that's my point, table. Right? Sometimes you want to be able to use a table to the knowledge presentation. So the fact that you can do what you showed with your clippity things is really key. So I think we can pause that discussion now, just knowing we have been further stirred along it. And look what I got. An extra different thing. It's called a globe. It's kind of weird that it actually helps, and it shows how low tech this is looking back from 10 years in the future. But anyway, so you can all access what Fabien will be talking about from our Future Text Lab page. Go to authorship, and it's the link there for Ring, if you want to do that. Shall we go in, Fabien, while you talk, or how do you want to do this? Because this is very exciting.
I don't want to do this because to be honest, I don't really know what people here have tried. So I don't know what is new for you anymore, and I cannot easily do screen sharing right now. What I suggest, though, if you want, Frode, is that you go on the Slack page, the channel, and show, let's say, the last 3 video recordings I did. Because then, at least for the recording, you will know what we're talking about. But the link there, I think, shows most of those. Dini showed it a little bit 2 days ago.
Well, I could go. I can go and share from the headset. You just tell me what to do.
Cool. That will work too.
Just really briefly, because we're on physical things. So I have 2 books that I bought in Asia. This one I bought in Japan, but it's a Chinese book. And the funny thing is, it's almost entirely empty. But every once in a while, there's a thing. So it's basically a notebook based on some Chinese philosopher's writing. So just the whole idea of having that in there. And this is the artist's letters, right? It's absolutely phenomenal because it reminds me that text is not 2D. Or sorry, I'm not talking about TD. Here it's typeset, right? With typewriters, we got typesetting. But look at all these other ways of scrolling your thoughts. Obviously, we need to try to do more of this, right? Or, I mean, how amazing is that, right? So we're all on the same page here. I mean, here's a beautiful one. Right. Okay. Yeah, I'll go on headset and do the sharing. Hopefully, I'm not out of battery on that device. I've been plugging other things in.
There are probably other links you would have to use, but it's okay.
Yeah, we'll
Depends
take
what we want to explore more simple.
one step at a time, exactly. I don't know how much battery I have. I'm gonna move this across. I know I look ridiculous, but no more ridiculous than you guys, so haha. The perils of the headsets. Do you want to talk about this before my sharing is useful?
So I'm not sure what this is. So I'll wait. There is something on the screen.
Considering that these recordings are recorded, so to speak, talk about it like we have no idea, if you don't mind, for another minute. Like we're entirely new, watching this in 20 years.
Right. So the premise here is that you want to be able to do complex things conveniently and easily, so you do not have a very difficult, challenging set of gestures that you need to learn. And one thing that I did try with people who are not familiar with XR, who are not developer, etc., is basically pulling things through a ring. So when you have a ring, and here for now, it's conveniently about 20 centimeters diameter rings, and you pull through it whatever 3D objects or text. But it's a thing, it's a gesture that once people they know how to pinch to grab an object, then pinching through another object. So pinching text through a ring comes for free, basically. Because if you right pinch the first letter of a code snippet or a text, then moving it around while holding it is pretty trivial. And thus, you can apply transformations to it. So that's the idea for this set of prototypes. And also because once you can pull things through rings, you can think about manipulating the rings themselves, so moving the rings around. And you can think of complex action with a history, so the same way you have a terminal. And thus, if you pull things through a ring, for example, you pull a piece of text through a ring to change the font size or to change its color or both. For example, you increase the font size and you set it to blue. Then the same way, for example, in an authoring environment, you might be able to save this as a name style. You could do this through the history of those rings. So namely the rings, the history of rings you used, they stack together. So you then start to have a stack of rings that you can reuse because then you pull through those two rings one after the other. So basically, it brings a set of affordances that are easy to learn, practically for free, but can have rich behavior after. Namely, for example, a history of rings that have a composite behavior. For example, here I was saying changing the color and the font size. But of course, it can be much more complex ones. So we are in the environment. I suggest you start by, for example, the example text.
Hello. Right.
Hello, hello. We see what you can see.
Don't leave it open.
The example text, yeah.
So, and you pull it through the blue ring. So what happens, and we haven't seen it, so you can release it somewhere, wherever you want. Doesn't matter. So now what you can see, first of all, is the text is blue. And it's pretty cool because I don't think any of us were able so far to change the color of text in VR to blue without like doing super complex stuff. So that in itself, I think is useful. You can see also in the top left that the ring became blue. That's the past ring, so we can have a history of it. What we haven't heard, but Frode, I hope, heard in the headset, was there was a cling cling, a sound when you did it. So if you can grab it back, but it's okay, honestly, it doesn't matter so much. And you pull it to the white ring in front of the blue ring, I think. And now, yes, the text is white again. And when you come close to one of the ring becomes wireframe. So as a kind of feedback to say, hey, it becomes interactable. And one thing that you haven't done, but you can try, is you pull it through the blue and then the white. So it becomes blue and then it becomes white. So again, you can see that you can have relatively complex behavior. And here something else is you have a contextual menu. So now you have on top of the last ring, we were able to go from blue, white, red, which ironically enough is the French flag, but it was done totally randomly. And when you pull things through those rings, you get new rings that are happier just in front of it. So again, like a contextual menu. If you can do it with the sky, please. So no, this won't work because it's another kind of property. So a sky is a single element of the entire scene, and you pull it through, let's say, the blue or the red ring, whatever you want. And now the entire scene, because of its sky, is blue or red or white or whatever you want. And same, it's something that I don't think Claude or most of us here have been able to easily do, namely modify a scene without programming.
That was
and
very
something-
cool. That's new to me, that bit.
Yes, and it applies to things. So, for example, more complex things. So this is a single thing, a sky, but it can be also to a set of elements. So, for example, the example of querying cards of reference that Mark curated, we can also apply this through rings so that we change all the cards to a certain color. So one quick thing you can try also, but it's hard for me to read now because it's moving quite fast. Well, actually, you can try collidable and you pull it through, let's say, the red one. Yeah, so now everything that is collidable became red. It's not a single thing, and same, this is quite powerful. You change the sky and then you change everything that is collidable, but could be any other class, literally CSS class in the virtual environment, and we change it. So now you're authoring visually the environment you're part of or inside of without touching a keyboard, without going to a programming environment. You just pull snippets of text through rings. And you can do this, yeah, with a 3D model. You can do it with more things. You can refresh. So this one, I think this one doesn't have a color like this. It's texture, but I think the ring on the right changed the size. And you can look, and on the right, the other right, that's the left. Nope. Yes, the right. Nope.
That's my right. You mean this one? You're right.
Then
You're
the
right.
left. No, the other way. The ring all the way to the left. Then
This
no,
one.
the other direction. The other direction.
This one.
No, further.
Down
Yes. Yes.
Ah. Oh my
Now
gosh.
it's
This
bigger.
is Alice in Wonderland. I just put. That's very cool.
So don't move too fast, please, otherwise it's impossible to read. And I think there was one thing that is important too, the GXR line in front of you, floating in front of, on top of a sky. You see a sky? Yeah. And the GXR one, and you pull it through the ring on your left. So yes, this one. And so you go on top. Now there is a new ring that you created. So stop. Too much. So that's new ring. So that's a new selection. But this you can discard it. The ring in front did not exist. So you created a ring by putting the code snippet in it. So you can type commands on your keyboard if you had a physical keyboard or virtual one. And then you can create a ring. And here, the add selection or create selection that would apply to it.
Sorry, too much fun. That is really cool and
Yes.
very powerful. I'm wondering, because these are faceted, they're not Bezier or whatever, right? For obvious reasons. Should we, what do you think, guys? have less facets? So instead of having a ring, we may have a hexagon or an octagon, or for, let's put it this way, coolness purposes and branding purposes? Or should we really try to do a ring? What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is to actually concentrate more on what it does and do the UI part later. This is the nice thing about this is it's very clear as an interaction metaphor. What's really interesting is that you can both do sort of large scale changes. You can do, in a sense, like programming changes. An interesting thing I was just thinking on as watching this was how we map it in a sense to the sort of the textual work we've been doing. Because one of the things that sort of it brings to mind is, okay, that's fine. So we have a very cool mechanism here that allows us to do things. How does the environment know, or so how do we signal from the document, for the want of a better term, to the control which thing we wanted to change? I don't know the answer to that, but I could see that that's something that can be done, and by gluing those two things, then this metaphor there. What it looks like, I think, is almost incidental, because probably it's yet another thing that, like us not, different people may want something different. But as an exploratory thing, when we don't yet know what it is, changing the shape of it, I don't think probably actually does much in the short term.
Mark,
Just to reply on this, the thing it applies it to is the things you pull through the ring. So that's why the ring arguably has its specific shape. Is you don't pull a piece of text and it applies to something else. The transformation applies to the thing you pull through. So normally you cannot do it by mistake, basically. And that's why, again, the shape is that specific. It could be another one, but then we would have to think about the meaning of it, because it applies to the object being pulled through. It can be indirect in the sense that, for example, collidable, that's a class. So it represents all the object that has that class, but it applies to the class you pull through that specific ring.
Mark, obviously we're working on the functionality, but when I ask a question like that, it's okay to say you don't have an opinion on it. I'm not saying we should now go into deep research thing on this. I care about the visuals. I think visuals communicate. Text is visual. So, please don't be so rough with just, slapping away the question.
I think you misunderstand the point I'm making, which is if we sort of, we can pretty up the ring, but then the text looks odd. The danger is it's a bit like playing with the fonts again, because I too want it all to look nice at the end, but the danger is you lose sight of what you're doing. So we start working on the wrong part of it. The bit that's really interesting that Fabian's done
I understand all of that, Mark, but that doesn't mean that a basic, simple question like that is like completely irrelevant. Anyway, okay, Peter.
Okay, I have a question for Fabian for sort of feasibility. Could we have an interaction? If we wanted to represent a pure function that wasn't altering the original value, could we have maybe a different color ring or a different number of facets on the ring to indicate that this is a pure function being represented by this ring, where you'd pinch an element, pull it through the ring, and when you unpinched on the other side of the ring, the original element would fly back to where it started, and a new element would fade in, representing the transformation of the original into a new object after the functionality of the function ring was applied to it. Is that something to be feasible to do? So basically, fly back the original to its starting point and then fade in or otherwise materialize the result of applying the function to that original object that got pulled through, and you could grab that new one and do something different with it.
So yes, basically the answer, to be short. I think what we need to think of or discuss here is indeed, for example, here now the rings are they are white unless they are applying a color to the resulting target or the element pulled through. So the blue ring applies the color blue. When you got near, it becomes a wireframe to say, hey, you're newly going to apply that function to that object. But we could indeed have, let's say, a different opacity level. Some of the rings, the code is inside the ring rather than on top of. All this, I think, needs to be discussed and explored, because for sure we can change the visual property to hint at the consequence of, let's say, pulling basically on the type of ring, which is a certain kind of functions. So we need to think a bit of how memorable it is, because again, pulling through the ring, even a kid can do it. Once you've done it even once, or even somebody tells you, even if you haven't seen it, you get it. But then if you need to think, oh, it's a different type of ring, which will have consequence, as you're saying, for example, if you pull through, maybe it becomes a new object. So for example, I have this banana, I pull through the ring, and halfway through it becomes this. Do I want it to throw it back where the banana, where they initially were, where I picked them? Do I want halfway through to literally transform to this so that I have the new object? I don't know, but I can say that indeed all this can be, I think it's worthwhile to explore, and technically it can be done to indeed change the shape. And it's honestly, I find it quite interesting and exciting, but I suggest to think a little bit through, because if we do this, for example, that the opacity means something, and we get used to it, it's going to be a bit hard when we change in 3 months or 6 months or wherever. So I suggest like a little, how do you say, a garden of rings with different behaviors to see which one sticks, which one are bad or not interesting or hard to remember. Because, sorry to insist a little bit, but I would say let's not risk how fast the onboarding is right now for something that is more powerful, but much harder to learn. But yeah, short answer, sorry, is yes. Can be done.
On the harder to learn point, which is really, really important, I really think we shouldn't care too much about that now. I think we should do capabilities first and then keep chipping away to make them smoother and smoother over time. We agree with that, right? I mean, we're not doing the UI for a commercial product. We're doing capabilities for research, just since
Yes.
you mentioned it.
So the one thing I'm basically I'm going to be annoyingly stuck up or not moving away from too much is basically composability. As long as one behavior can lead to a lot of different results, how to do it precisely and how it look like, I'm fine with. But if at some point we do one thing to get one result, it's not very powerful. But if we can do one thing to get a bunch of results and we adjust how to do it, what it looks like, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I think you get very strong reaction from this crowd on that.
Yeah, I think that Doug probably would have argued for being willing to accept a little bit more of a learning curve on the front end to have greater functionality on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all would agree with him on that. But of course, at a certain point, you know, we want the smoothness. And I have to tell you, the way it is now, Fabian, is very smooth. The way that you have set up the distances, because you and I argued about distances forever, but the way they currently are, because ideally, at least one of the interactions will be you pull out a piece of text and the circle appears then. It's not somewhere else in the space waiting for you, right? And then we have to decide on.
Isn't it the case now? Because, for example, when you pull through the first ring, normally you have 4 rings that
Yes,
appear.
yeah. Oh, that's
Okay,
different.
okay.
Thank you for clarifying. What I mean is right now you have a few circles in space. You pull through and then secondary circles appear. Yes,
Yep.
Absolutely what I want from what we've discussed. Absolutely beautiful. What I'm talking about is you select some text And if you, I don't know, we have to decide on that. Let's say you pull through and you do a secondary motion, or you pull through with different fingers, instead of
Maybe
indicating, you
this.
just,
Maybe you.
yeah, something like that. Exactly, right? Then, because in a sense, these circles, these rings are contextual menus. That's what they
Yeah.
are, right?
Yeah.
So the hierarchy of going through them is really, really important. And just like we experimented last year, and we'll do more this year with the hand menu, we want to get to a point where you point your fingers and in a sequence, almost like this, and something happens. We want to do the same thing with the ring. So if you want to color everything of that class blue, you should be able to do that special pull. And once you get that menu, you know that top right, for instance, is color, and then down again is another one for blue. So you do this, right? So you have a 3D gesture. Awesome. Yes.
So I will try this. Namely that you have a pinch, and then you tap with any other finger, but I imagine the third finger, because I think that's relatively reliable and doesn't clash with any other gesture. I think very few people hold, let's say, like this, but I'll try. And I think this to start the contextual menu probably works quite well because the contextual menu already is in there. So to me, it's low cost and I think quite easy to learn. And what I wanted to say is some of the thing I tried but I haven't shown yet is a spiral layout. So right now, if you pull the first ring, you have a ring on top, bottom, left, right. So 4 rings. But you can have 5 rings, 26 rings, how many ever you want. Of course, 26 is kind of a mess. But what I think is interesting, potentially exciting with, let's say, the spiral thing is because you pull through, you do, let's say, a contextual menu. And if you have, let's say, the 5 most used rings, for example, change font size, change color, save JSON remotely, whatever you want, is that you pull through the first and then the second and then the third. So basically you do that spiral motion. And I think that's quite efficient and same, like easy. Once you pull through one ring, then pulling through the second, a little bit closer to it, closer to you, is quite fast. So there are a couple of layouts basically that I started to implement that could be used either for contextual menu or for other way to do, for example, the virtual keyboard through rings. That could be tried, but yeah, we're getting there.
Peter.
Yeah, I was thinking that secondary gesture, first you pinch and add another finger, could be used to distinguish between a procedural application versus a pure function creating a modified copy of the original. And then we wouldn't have to do anything with the appearance of the ring. It would just be that gestural modification. And if you didn't know about it, you could completely ignore it. And once you were ready to reach the next level where you started playing with functional programming, you could have that abstraction by just changing the gesture slightly, and everything else would be the same intuitively.
Yes, also. To try, honestly, let's not, I want this to work well, but I'm not sure how reliable that is. So I suggest...
But in a very real sense, Fabian, and with all love and respect, who cares? Because you're making it composable. So if that gesture has to change, it can change. And I think that's really, really important. It may even be in the shipping version, so to speak, that there are a number of different ways you can spawn this. Because, for instance, somebody might just feel this is really dumb for their own personal. Fine, there's a different. Yeah. Anyway,
yes.
we got to
one
wrap
quick
up.
thing.
Yes.
I absolutely need to wrap up also, so no problem there for me. But for Peter's, in terms of pure functions or having a modified thing, another way that doesn't add any gesture is you have your set of rings that apply transformation to your element. You can also think that there is a first ring that you pull through, which clone the current object, and then the transformation is applied to the cloned object. So that means the first one that you pull through snaps back in place. You have the modified one, and then you have it applied to blue, increase font, etc. Because I think then that adds a lot of, it's pretty much built in at this point. So I think in terms of there is no learning, you just have a ring which is clone the current object and swap it. So you don't have, again, anything else on top of it. And I think that's, yeah, low effort
Brilliant.
and
Yes,
really.
I love it. I love it. Brilliant.
Great.
Considering the environment we're working in, you know, one of the default text ones will be move out to copy as a citation. All these things are now eminently possible.
Yeah.
Two things here. One, really briefly, this is not to start a discussion, it's just to highlight issues. Within the kind of object hierarchy, the word scene is taken, given,
Guys,
great.
I just found an amazing.
And then we have, I just wanted to make sure that placements and frames are different, right? So a wall or a table or whatever, we just have to keep it in mind that you may use them. They may be related physical or not. So that was just a detail. And then also Future of Text Social, first week of June. Peter, if you can come over to Europe, that'd be great. Mark, if you can come north of Southampton, that would be great. We're currently trying to decide whether it's going to be Norway or UK. We're also trying to decide on who to invite because it's really this kind of nerdy talk. So it's got to be people comfortable with that within our community and so on. So yes, votes for Norway or London are being taken as we speak. Mark, you want to go to Norway? Guarantee Fabienne is either way.
Yeah, I always like going to Norway. I mean, I to be honest, I don't think I'm going to be able to make a meetup. I need to actually take a break after doing this paper, and actually take a rest from things. So I'm
You're saying this is not restful?
Well, it is and isn't, but I know I've been told I need to be doing a bit less for a bit, so I'm going to act on that. So the answer is I probably won't. I mean, either place would be nice, but I don't think I will be. I don't think I will be doing it.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And if it changes, it changes, and it'll be a bit like last year. It'll be easygoing, but of course, Fabienne will be there and sticking headsets on us to get us in the room, so to speak, of doing some tests. And I think that'll be very worthwhile to do that. What's that, Peter?
Bonus nerd points if you recognize my background image.
No. Sherlock Holmes?
Yep. Sherlock Holmes Museum. Study.
Nice.
That's another reason to go to London. So that's, and also Fabienne, I have to come to Brussels soon, or you have to come here because there's jewelry at stake.
Yes, I remember.
It's kind of an amazing process. Just as a kind of a winding down comment to you guys, because it's a bit inspirational. There's a jewelry place by Fabienne's where I bought these basically tiny blue tacks that I squeezed one, Emily just squeezed the other one, and they've now turned it into gold earrings for Emily. So it's the fingerprint. That's a 3D shape. How amazing is that, right? I think it's
With meaning.
and now they're done, ready to pick up. Fabienne, when are you back in Brussels?
Tuesday. By the way, in terms of logistics, I'm pretty sure I'm flying during the call on Monday when there is the presentation from our dear friend. So I don't think I'll make it.
Okay.
We'll see.
It'll be recorded and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, and I think we're making some real progress now. It's Mark and Peter, I hope you'll go into the Fabienne environment, start pulling things through rings. And I do think, you know, of course, I agree with you, Mark, it's the functionality, but I do think the shape of things influence how we think about them. And I definitely lean towards a circle spherical ring. But I'm just wondering, because when you do this, how many degrees of freedom should you have? 4 or 8?
So I really have to go, and I don't want this discussion to happen without me. So I suggest we do a session and also in public with this, because, for example, you have to think that the ring, you pull through it, but the interaction area is actually a sphere, but it should be maybe a disk, and maybe that disk should be visible because you go through that plane And maybe if you edit the ring itself while in XR, typing or whatever, or editing through other rings, I have little sketches about this.
Do you
So
use
I'm
your
just,
Remarkable enough?
well, every day I have 5 or more pages.
Do you
It
easily
depends.
get the pages into your other digital environments?
Yes, and those are, you see the spheres and whatnot. Some analogy about the cell in the human body, because you have the sphere itself as a boundary. So there are a lot of things to go through in terms of how to interact with it. So
I have a request.
it's
I have
not
a
a
request.
discussion that happens in a minute.
I have a request. How about,
Yeah.
Fabian, you consider making the amount of vertices equal to the amount of options that presents?
Could be, no, but honestly, a lot of this is, again, it's exciting and we can throw things at it, but we need to actually try, do proposals like this, see how it goes. Because again, the wireframe, you can put the text in it to be readable or hide it. Maybe because it's a read-only function to go a bit to pure functions, as Peter was mentioning before. Maybe you don't. So there are a lot of things to actually go through. And I think if we make it gorgeous but meaningless, we're losing a lot of powerful affordances. But maybe if it's a wireframe, you edit the ring itself and you blow up the ring as an entire sphere, you go in to edit it. So there is a lot of things to go through.
I'm not talking about prettiness. I'm talking about if there are 3 options, make it a triangle. So you know which
Yeah, I know,
directions
but
are live. If there
I,
are
I,
6 options, give it 6 sides. So you have an indication of targets.
so we need to go all of us, but you will need to try more before you make more suggestions. Also, because some of the rings you can see in the video, if you turn them, you change the value. If you turn 3 of them, you turn a composite value for the color, and then you can have also the Venn diagram of the intersection of those 3 rings. But when you turn through, maybe you also want notches on the ring because you snap on their angle. Because maybe, for example, changing the font to 11.33 is idiotic. Maybe you want 12 because that's the typical value for font size people use. So, and this I really recommend is something to also to try with to get more of those ideas that are actually usable, because that gesture is easy. That gesture is easy. That one is hard. You see, it's really awkward. I need to turn the whole arm. So there are a lot of things there to explore
Let's do
that
that.
we need to explore together.
Let's schedule that for Wednesday week.
Yeah,
We did a
I
lot
would
on
say.
frames today, which just resulted in confusion, but in useful confusion. We did some work on the ring today, which got us further. So I think we will schedule ring. All
That
right.
works. I mean,
Thanks, everyone.
any excuse for that I can have for Paula to buy more Tupperware or plastic containers, she will be happy. So that works for me for prototyping with this kind of things.
Well, I have to go buy a bloody Remarkable now. But by the way, how do you get the things of the Remarkable into your other environment? What's the connection? What's the means?
The SSH,
Uh,
so command line, but it's because I do it the geeky way, open source with a lot of tinkering, but there are other ways. But yeah, try it. Yeah, they have their own cloud thing that you might want or not want. They have some integration that I don't want, but it's possible to do it click free or command line free, basically.
it's kind of important because there's a lot of discussion with Bob Horn and everybody about diagramming. And to me,
Right, I saw this, and I bought a book in the philosophy bookshop in Paris 2 months or a month or so ago, specifically on diagramming. So when I'm back in, I'll reply to that thread at that point.
oh, hang on. Sorry, I just remembered. I got an email from Bob Stein. This is something we should maybe actually go to in Italy. Please click on that link really briefly, and then scroll down to diagrams, a project by, well, hang on, there's a direct link. It's in Venice. I just forgot to share those with you guys, but yeah. All right, anyway, yes, let's look forward to next Wednesday, and this is very exciting. And that's it, really. All right, thanks, guys. By the way, Mark, if you have further notions of what you want as an academic author, don't keep it a secret.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah.